Okay, good evening. I'm calling to order the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for April 21st, 2021. All right, now can the recorder please call the roll?
Member Stapleton?
Here.
Chair Tigan?
Here.
Secretary Tom Anderson?
Present.
Member Sharuk? Member Sharuk?
Present.
Member Phillips?
Here.
Member Davis is absent. Vice Chairperson Leung?
Basketball there the whole time. I was the only Black employee that maybe a year.
Vice Chairperson Leung? We'll come back to her. Member McCoy?
Here.
Member Gonzalez is absent. Member Brown?
Present.
Member Hoy?
Here.
Member William Anderson?
Present.
Member Nordyke?
Here.
Member Sund?
Here.
Member Lewis?
Here.
Member Milton?
Here.
Member Bennett?
Here.
Member DeCarmo?
Here.
And Vice Chairperson Leung. I think I see her. Here. There she is. Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have some additions to the agenda this evening. Could I have a motion to approve the additions to the agenda?
I move approval of additions to the agenda.
I have a motion from Member Hoy.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
A second from Member Brown. Thank you, everyone, for your enthusiasm. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please signify by saying no. Okay, hearing no objections, the motion is passed unanimously. We will begin tonight with virtual public comment. The Budget Committee meeting agenda is organized in a way that more closely aligns with the City Council agenda. So this is an opportunity at the beginning of the meeting for comments on agenda items other than public hearings and deliberations. At the end of the meeting, there will be an opportunity to comment on items not on the agenda. For members of the public who have signed up to testify, we'll ask that you provide your name and your neighborhood and ward. You will then have 3 minutes to testify before the committee. If you are representing a group, you will be provided 5 minutes. This evening, we have one person signed up for public testimony at the beginning of the meeting, and we also have one member of the public signed up to testify at the end of the meeting, and I would like, hopefully by consent, unanimous consent of the organization, to hear both pieces of testimony before the meeting begins tonight. Everyone okay with that? I was advised I don't even need a motion. We can just move forward with it. Okay, thank you. So let's start with Alvin Clausen, if you are here.
He did not show up, Chair Teagan, so maybe we could have the other speaker go first, and then if Alvin joins, we'll switch after.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Jim Shepke was signed up to testify at the end of the meeting. Mr. Shepke, would you like to go now, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Teagan and members of the committee. My name is Jim Shepke, and I reside in Ward 2. Thank you for letting me address you this evening. I've submitted written testimony for this meeting about the Salem Public Library. I hope you got a chance to look at it. It provides data that shows how our library is woefully understaffed and underfunded. It has been for many years. I wanted to add to that by speaking to you specifically about something that you should do this year to begin to restore our library, and that is to fund Monday hours at the main library for 6 months from January to June. It won't cost a lot, and here's why you need to do it. First, you should know that Salem's library is the only main library serving more than 40,000 population in Oregon that is not open on Monday. I took the trouble to check the websites of 16 libraries from Portland going down the population list to Milwaukee, and they're all normally open on Monday. Our library is the only exception. Another reason has to do with the main library renovation. Some of you may recall that I led the campaign with my friend Judy Miller in 2017 to renew our library. That was our slogan, in which over 60% of voters in Salem said yes to an $18.6 million bond measure. I'm pleased to see from the photographs that our library really is being renewed, thanks to the excellent work of city staff and architectural and design consultants. My hat's off to them. When the library reopens later this year, it will seem to many like a brand new library. Having witnessed the opening of over 100 new and renewed libraries when I was the state librarian of Oregon for 2 decades, I can tell you that the excitement and enthusiasm for our library when it reopens will be tremendous. And that means the community will expect to be able to use their renewed library and use it every day of the week. There will be much disappointment if they go to their renewed library on a Monday and see a dark building with doors locked. In the past, I actually once saw a mother with children banging on the door of our library on a Monday. It was a very sad sight that I'll never forget. So I implore you, do not let this happen again. Please consider funding Monday hours for our main library beginning January 1st. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shepke. Any questions from the committee? I see Member Stapleton and Member Anderson.
Hi, Mr. Shepke. I was just wondering, just clarification on your testimony. You said that you researched 16 different libraries and none of them were closed on Mondays. Were they closed any other day? I just want to make sure.
There might have been one that was closed on another day. I'll cop to that.
Okay.
But I'd say at least 15 were open 7 days a week.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Mr. Powers, I would love to know what that kind of inquiry would look like, how much that would cost, even if we were looking at something like after the new library is open, what it would cost for us to go 7 days a week. That's something that's been talked about in my realm a lot. So I would love to see what that would cost so that we could consider something like that.
Thank you, Member Stapleton. Secretary Anderson and then Member Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jim, as usual, you've done a lot of thorough research here, and I think in the beginning you indicated something like it wouldn't cost that much. So have you done actually any sort of, no, okay, you're just saying it would be less than 1/7 of the budget for the library right now.
In the big scheme of things, Counselor, it wouldn't be that much. And, you know, if you look at my written testimony,
I did.
You'll see that we use very few volunteers at the Salem Public Library compared to other libraries. That's an area that we could really beef up when the new library opens. And if we had a lot more volunteers every day of the week, then the cost may not be that great. So that's what I would suggest that you look at.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Member Milton.
Yeah, hi, Jim. Thanks for coming on tonight. Hey, quick question. Do you have any data that for the committee so we would know, like, if we did open on a Monday, how many more guests the library would receive that day versus other days? And basically that's my question, is what's the participation level you would see by opening just on Mondays?
I think in my experience with public libraries, the big days of the week are Saturday and Sunday, and especially Sunday is a great day. but every other day of the week, you'll get a lot of people to come. So there's really no downtime for a public library. People come every day of the week, and I think the attendance would be really terrific. And you know, it'd be a big service to the community to be open on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Member Nordyke, then Secretary Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Teagan, and thank you, Mr. Shepke, for your testimony this evening. It's sincerely appreciated. You know, one of the things I think a lot of folks don't know about our library is that it's more than just a place to check out books. Can you briefly describe what are some of the other uses that people currently do at our library?
Oh, there's so much more than just checking out books. The programs for children, I think, are the most important things that we can do. And the more of those we can do, and those are typically done on weekdays. Preschool story time. You could have a preschool story time on Monday, and it would be greatly appreciated. The other thing that comes to mind is internet, providing internet service to people that don't have computers, don't have Wi-Fi. Our unhoused population takes advantage of that. And it's very important that the community provide that. And so I think that would be a really terrific service that's really needed 7 days a week. If you're going to apply for a job and you don't have a computer or internet and it's Monday, you're going to want to go someplace to do that. And again, if you look at the data that I submitted in my written testimony, I think we're at the bottom of the heap in terms of providing internet service to the community. So that really stands out for me as something very important.
Thank you. Secretary Anderson.
Thanks. This is just a general comment and not something from Mr. Shepke, but I know in the past we've gone back and forth with the West Salem Library. I don't even know now, is it open the 6 days a week that the regular library is open? Is it open 2 days a week? And how that relates to, say, a limited funding that we might be able to increase the libraries. You know, there ought to be some sort of comparison between what is it better to open Salem on Monday, the main library on Monday, or open a library that's open 3 days a week another couple of days. I mean, in general, we should open libraries more. And I'm not even going to talk about the library we need in Northeast Salem. That's time for another discussion. But those are things that when community development talks about things, I'd like to have them look at that a little bit.
If I could just comment, I think everybody should know that the West Salem Library is open on Monday. But I think it's not the case that people, you know, from my side of the river go to the West Salem Library on Monday because the main library is closed. That may happen a little bit, but I don't really think it's a substitute for having our main library open.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Shepke. We consider the library part of our welcoming and livable community, which we discussed at last week's meeting, but we didn't have much robust conversation about the library. So thank you for bringing the topic back to the committee and good conversation. I guess I'll give Alvin Clausen one more time if he's joined us. Kelly?
He has not, Chair.
Okay, then we will move on from public testimony. Thank you. Again, for the testimony this evening and the conversation, we've also received written correspondence as listed under item number 2 from the additions agenda. So our next order of business this evening on the agenda is the approval of the April 14th, 2021 Budget Committee minutes. And can I have a motion from the floor to approve the minutes from last week's meeting?
I move approval.
Thank you, Member Chirac.
I second.
And I'll take the second from Member Anderson. Thank you to you both. Any discussion regarding the minutes from last week's meeting? Okay, not seeing any or hearing any discussion. All those in favor of approving the minutes from last week, please signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed can say no. All right, hearing no opposition, we will consider the motion passed unanimously. Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to our action items. Tonight, we have one errata before us to approve. Mr. Eggleston, will you please walk us through this errata that was provided as part of this evening's agenda?
Thank you, Chair. As a reminder, an errata sheet is used to identify and correct any errors found in the budget or budget document that are inaccurate or could cause confusion. In this case, the budget display for the downtown parking fund was incorrect. The overall citywide display for the fund was correct, but the individual display found on pages 304 and 306 required a correction to the parking permit administration transfer and an increase to contingencies to fully appropriate the fund. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that description. Mr. Eggleston, can I have a motion from the floor to approve errata sheet number 2?
I move approval of errata sheet number 2.
Thank you, Member Hoy.
Second.
I hear a second from Member Lewis. Is there any discussion regarding this errata sheet? Okay, seeing and hearing no discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed can signify by saying no. Seeing and hearing no opposition, we'll consider this motion approved. Thank you. Okay, back to you, Budget Officer Eggleston. Could you please review the information items and handouts this evening?
Thank you, Chair. There are 3 information items for you this evening. The first is a summary of your actions, request for information, and the testimony from the April 14th meeting last week. The second item is a summary of the homeless programs included in the budget as requested. And the third is a summary of the Budget Committee questions and answers from staff. And I also emailed that out on Monday to allow you some additional time to review. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Okay. I want to, before I ask the committee members if they have questions regarding the handouts, I just want to give a verbal reminder of tonight's agenda. We have maybe a question and answer session on some of this important stuff that we asked for follow-up on. We have the CIP, which generally takes a good amount of time to go through. It's an important document, important planning document and budgeting document. And then we'll move into the actual orders of business. So if there are some of these topics that we asked for information on this week that we've been given information from city staff, might be better aligned with next week's meeting when we talk about the safe community. But I won't stomp on any conversation that wants to happen. I just want to remind folks how large of a burrito we've ordered tonight. At least that's what I had for dinner. So let's head into questions. I see Member Nordyke. Go ahead.
Sure. I just want to, before we have any discussion of the capital improvement plan, I would just like to declare a potential conflict of interest, considering that capital improvements may impact me or my family. So I forget the precise nomenclature, but I just want to declare the potential conflict, which means I can still participate in the actual process. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Nordyke. So before we move into the capital improvement plan, I do want to open up for questions about the information handouts from city staff back to the committee members. Member Anderson, do you want to get us started?
Yes, so this is really a clarification that I think will help for next week's meeting. The question regarding the number of calls the police department gets in, the response was 100,000. Is there a way for us to find out, was that 100,000 calls that police officers actually went to, or was it 100,000 calls that they received? So if we could get that information, I think it would help with the discussion about a possible mobile response unit and what effect it could have.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Chief, do you want to address that if you can shortly?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate being able to answer that one now. Those are calls that were actually dispatched, so those were calls for service that our officers handled.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I need to do a little bit of adjustment on my screen because I do have questions about some of the information provided regarding the rescue plan funding. And I'm not sure that there's a better area to talk about it than just to continue to have the conversation we had last week for a little bit further. But I guess I'll defer to the group if there's anyone, any committee members who had questions about the ARPA funding description that was provided to the committee. I don't want to monopolize the conversation. All right, then I'll dive in. It seems to me this is, I suppose, a comment and question to Josh and the city manager. Page 6 of your responses to the committee member questions seems to have the most detailed information about what money was held back in out of the 32 million that is essentially revenue replacement. And I guess I just want to make crystal clear to me how you went about doing it, which was that you looked at fiscal year 2019 in terms of collections or money that would have come in otherwise, and you just looked at the delta between fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20, and that ended up being the difference. Did you do any sort of line by line? Well, this one was connected to COVID and the response to the coronavirus, or it was just the difference? Because the one that really stands out to me is that we had $500,000 in red light photo fines, plus or minus, in fiscal year 19. We didn't collect any in fiscal year 2020. And because of that, the decision's been made to hold back over $1 million of that money into the general fund. Am I walking through the committee on that in a way that makes sense, Josh?
Great question. And yes, so we used fiscal year 2019 as a base and then compared it to fiscal year 2020 and 2021. Your call out for the photo red light, I think that one actually could be an error now that I'm looking at it, because we moved those fines to a different fund. So I think they would qualify, but I do believe they're in a different fund. So that $500,000 there wouldn't actually be in the general fund. It would be in a different fund. But to answer your question, what we displayed here is where the revenue was less. It doesn't take into account where revenue was higher. And again, we're still waiting for guidance, more direct guidance from the U.S. Treasury on how actually they're going to make that determination. We used the fiscal year 2019 as the base. We didn't increase it for what we expected in 2020, because of course, generally revenues increase. And then there was a filter for, hey, this is likely COVID related or could be COVID related. But again, we'll wait for the U.S. Treasury guidance for, you know, what filter they put on it.
And then just to be clear, you took the difference for fiscal year 2021, which is 4.4 million and change, and then just as a budgeting exercise, doubled it for fiscal year 2022, just to say, hey, this is kind of a swag. We don't actually know what it's going to look like in 2022, but this is our best guess.
So we took the expected revenue loss from the current year, fiscal year 2021, and applied that same measure to 2022. So there's no doubling. It was just simply applying the same revenue loss to the next year.
Okay. Right. Sorry, I didn't mean doubling, taking it twice in 1 year, but for each fiscal year that the ARPA would apply, you're trying to anticipate lost revenue.
That is correct. And of course, once the guidance is received, you know, we'll narrow down that number. I'm sure it will be different than what's displayed, but we wanted to make sure we counted for everything. And to be clear, if it wasn't used for revenue replacement, it would fall into that other trust fund, that other reserve for other programs. Or,
Okay.
or the direct COVID response.
Okay, Member Sund.
Thank you, Chair. So 2 questions on that. How much, remind me again, how much of the 11.3 then we are recognizing in this budget, not in the trust fund, but as funds available based on the calculation you've done for lost revenues?
So the entire 11.3 for the general fund is recognized in the proposed 2022 budget. Some of it is simply received in fiscal year 2021. So we expect to receive it here in the next month or so, but we're rolling it forward into 2022 as fund balance, savings account, whatever you want to call it, in the general fund.
Okay. And thank you. Do we have, so I know the guy you had mentioned, a few times, the guidance is still forthcoming, and I definitely can resonate with this. We had a lot of back and forth with the CARES Act at the hospital when we were working through it and closing our fiscal year and preparing our budget. We were, so I guess we were working with external advisors, legal advisors on kind of, best understanding at the time. Is there something, given the state of the guidance, is there some assurance that legal advisors are signing off on for cities and budget committees like ourselves to be able to look at this and say, we are comfortable with, I'm noticing now that you've provided the detail, the combination of budget to actual and actual to, or actually the combination of prior year to actual plus prior year to budget. And those, now it's 2 different things molded together. Do we have something? It seems very uncertain. And I get that that's how it is right now. Totally understand that. I'm just, with general fund, that's sort of where my hesitancy comes from.
It's a good question. I can appreciate it. So we know not 2019 and 2020, we know that delta there. And we'll know 2021 here in a couple months when we finish the year. We wouldn't request that revenue, that lost revenue. We wouldn't recognize it until the revenue was actually lost, until we close those various months, until we close the years. I'm fairly certain that would be a reporting requirement for the U.S. Treasury.
So, follow up, Chair, if you're
please.
So the 4.4 million that we've assumed for fiscal year 22, we wouldn't recognize it. However, would it be possible that by recognizing or by including these funds in the general fund, that the budget could commit spending using those funds before recognizing the revenue?
So we're budgeting. We're not actually spending the money. Of course, it would go through any kind of legal requirement. We'd make sure it was all according to the guidance we received. So if for example, if this 11.3 ended up being $10 million, that's what we would receipt in the general fund, and the balance would go to the reserve. And again, we have the entire amount budgeted, and I fully expect to go back to council at least once, if not multiple times, to do kind of the transfer cleanup for what actually ends up happening.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Member Sun. Member Milton.
I am so sorry. It's trying to unmute myself was crazy there. Hey, I do want to go back to Reed's question, and for some of our members and even council, you guys, we brought this up about what Reed mentioned, and I thought that was a pointing question about the advisors to review the city to make sure it's being audited and it all makes sense to what the budget is. I would say, and it's probably on record, about 2 years ago, we brought this up and it kind of went to the wayside. And I'll tell you what, I'm a strong advocate for exactly what Reed was referencing to, just to make sure that balances and checks are in place. And that question was not answered. And I really would like to have that question answered. has the city looked into to see if we are going to consider having advisors put in place to just do the balance and check and to make sure we are doing what's appropriate with the funding?
I apologize if I didn't answer that question. We have our internal legal team review everything. So just like with the CARES Act, they were in those weekly conversations with the submissions. They reviewed the submissions to, in this case, the state. In this case, it would be the Treasury. So we would rely on the city attorney's office for that guidance. And Bob, if you have some follow-up.
I have in real fast, sorry, Bob, and I'll let you go.
Sure.
I understand you say we use our internal legal, but do we have an outside advisor looking into this? Because at the end of the day, it's still the city. And who's verifying the city, no matter if it's internal legal or not, who's doing their part to make sure the city's staying on, having the checks and balances in place?
Yeah, Josh, if I may, Josh had said some of this, so forgive me for repeating it, but I think it's important to understand that this part of it anyway is an appropriation exercise. It's our best guess, but we will follow the guidance with regard to revenue replacement. Josh gave the example, if we budgeted or appropriated $11.3 million worth of revenue replacement, and we only can identify $10 million of it, that $1.3 million will go to the reserve. With regard to who's looking at our interpretation of the guidance, Josh talked about the weekly calls that we have legal involved in. I am involved, our budget team and our accounting staff is involved. And the guidance, although it does change, it is pretty clear. And to give you an idea, on our 5 submissions for the CARES Act funding, 2 of our items were audited and deemed acceptable. We're very good at documenting anything that we're requesting for actual expenditures, not this exercise, not appropriating budget dollars, but actually asking for reimbursement and having the documentations to defend against an audit. And so I'm not sure what the engagement of an outside auditor to interpret the guidance that we've already demonstrated we're quite good at. I don't know how that would enhance the process.
In addition, Bob, if I may, our financials are audited every year also with our annual audit by a firm, and they reviewed all those submissions also.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that was going to be my more direct question is, does the city have an outside auditor?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Member Sund, I see your hand and I see Member McCoy.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be possible, just thinking about all the different alternatives and options for the committee, is it possible to not, to have the 11.3 million in its entirety be appropriated to the trust and agency fund? Apologize if I'm using the wrong terms, versus the general fund in an abundance of caution, or is that not a possibility here?
It's certainly possible, yes. I do think there's a reasonable expectation that maybe not 11.3, but somewhere in that ballpark will be acceptable for revenue replacement. So I would recommend that there's some amount still there.
And Josh, I just to add is we're on weekly calls trying to get an idea of what other municipalities and counties are doing. And, our $8 million for outside projects is roughly 25%, right, of the 32.9 million that we're receiving. Every submission I've seen so far from counties or other municipalities, after they pay themselves, revenue replacement, because it's very clear in the guidance that a priority is sustaining city services and replacing those dollars. So your general fund doesn't wipe out its reserve, your utility fund doesn't get exhausted, and it is clearly a priority to pay yourself first and then distribute the rest. Is everyone that I've seen thus far is like 10 or 12% of their total allotment. So at 20%, at least what I've seen so far, we're having the largest that I've seen set aside for outside of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Chair. I just a couple of questions. This is on page 4, where you're listing what was reimbursed and what wasn't. It's sort of vague. Emergency medical response expenses and payroll for public health and safety employees is, you know, the lion's share of the money. What exactly is the emergency medical response expenses? Is that the fire department?
Yes, and since I was directly, I'll take it, Josh, because I was directly involved with the CARES Act reimbursement. We used a methodology of charging the CARES Act fund for all firefighter expenditures on a percent to total COVID calls to total calls. And this was approved by the state as a good allocation. We didn't do the administrative cost or the chief's cost or anything. These were just firefighters' costs. We took all the firefighters' cost centers, and then they have a log of all their calls in any given month. And if 25% of them were for COVID related, and we could demonstrate that, we did that 25% times all the firefighter costs and asked for reimbursement. And that was one of the items that was audited and approved. Our methodology was approved.
Thanks. What's the, and public health and safety employees are also fire department?
Yeah, you know,
It's sort of vague. That's the only reason I'm asking you.
No, you're right. The one at the top of the chart is the firefighter. The that's a little lower, and I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, is they allow, and I think one of the answers to the questions is how did you determine, now remember, we're not talking about revenue reimbursement. Now we're talking about COVID expenditure reimbursement. So for one of the questions was, how did you determine what expenses are COVID related? And our answer was, we use the CARES Act guidance and we requested what has not been reimbursed. So we asked for $7.2 million of CARES Act funding, and that took us through maybe October. And we've continued to spend in the same categories, but we had already maxed out our reimbursement. So the categories are just the unreimbursed part of the CARES Act categories. So the second category, they allowed us to do a presumption of cost for police. That's the lower number, the lower large number. Gotcha. And so it did not require the same methodology as the firefighters, you know, percent of total calls. They allowed us to do just a presumption of police costs. Now, I'll tell you is there was a discussion whether we continue that same presumption out into fiscal year 2022, and we agreed not to. We've been incredibly conservative because we want to be bulletproof when we're audited. But we've been incredibly conservative with our methodologies. And you'll notice, I don't know if it shows on the information that we gave you, but we did not continue the presumption for the police costs going forward.
Yep.
Only did it for fire, because that's really clear. We can always get a count of how many calls were COVID related.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Just want to survey the floor and see if there's any other comments or questions on the information related to ARPA, especially folks who weren't around last week. I see Member Nordyke and then Member Sund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in terms of the questions that the city staff provided to us, one of the questions related to how much it costs to fund EMT and paramedic positions. And I didn't see in the materials a great breakdown of that information. And I'd like to have a little more specificity. Do we fund EMTs? Do we fund paramedics? How much does each FTE cost? I know that FTEs include not just their salary, but their benefits. And I know that giving me a number down to the last penny may not be possible now, but I would like to have additional information so I can understand how much those positions currently cost.
If I may, on the second page, there's a breakdown of the classifications, and they don't equate directly to an EMT paramedic. We require different certifications for different positions, and sometimes even if we don't require it, they still maintain those certifications. But the firefighter medic is going to be that the lower level EMT, and I think if there's someone from the fire department, they could address what classification requires which certification. But I think if we can just line up those certifications, I think it would answer your question.
Chief Niblock.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. The fire department does not currently have emergency medical technicians as a classification. All of our firefighters, all of our apparatus operators are paramedic certified. So that's a level above an EMT. So we don't have a pay rate for EMTs in the city. We do have a Falck ambulance provider that does have EMTs on their staff, and we can get that rate for you. They start out and what they go to. So that would give you an idea of what an EMT, the market for an EMT would be in Salem, but we currently don't have any in the city.
So my follow-up, can you give me a rough ballpark? How much is a paramedic?
I think Josh provided the total breakdown for that in the report, which is the total cost. I don't have the numbers in front of me to give you that. If you're looking for $1 per hour or you're looking for an annual salary, we can certainly provide that to you. I know that the top step EMT at Falck, and that's somebody with 15 years experience, I believe makes about $23 an hour for that rate. And the paramedic would be considerably higher than that.
The average burden cost for a firefighter medic here in Salem for fiscal year 2022, it's $175,000 annually.
Oh, I'm sorry, Josh. I didn't mean to speak over you. Can you say that again, please?
A firefighter medic, the paramedic that the fire chief was speaking to, the average cost is $175,000 on an annual basis. That's fully burdened. So the salary is about half of that, and the rest are benefits and other expenses like taxes.
Thank you.
Okay. Member Hoy, are you on this moment?
I'm sorry, can I interrupt for one moment?
Please.
I just got a text from Councilor Leung, and she needs to be let back in the meeting. She was booted and is trying to get back in. So if somebody from the technical staff could let her back in, that'd be great.
Thank you, Member Hoy.
She should be back in now.
Thank you. I think with Member Nordyke's request on the table, we'll go back up to Member Sund. Did you still have a question on the information items?
Yes, thank you. Just quickly, would you be able to provide the guidance? I know a lot of times we say, the guidance, and I've done some Googling, but it would just, if we're gonna talk about the guidance a lot, it might just be good to know what we're looking at. And I guess I'm particularly interested in like in the what was provided, you know, an example like the court fines. So is it, you know, do we feel like the court fine decreases because we canceled things because of COVID, or because less people, you know, had fines because people were staying out of trouble more? I'm just trying to, I'm really interested in the piece that the guidance, or at least what I've seen references, which is due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I guess I'm just really hung up on how much of a case are we going to have to make through a single audit when it comes to this due to the coronavirus pandemic when we look at the list. That, yeah.
Yeah, Member Sund, we will provide you what we have, but there is no detailed guidance. There are 4 categories we've been given. Revenue replacement is the largest category. Of course, it's what we've spent talking about. Like Josh said, we took all of the revenue shortfalls, not from budget for a given year, because a budget might have anticipated more than the prior year. We took it from actual, so we went very conservative. And then anything that was short of the actuals from the fiscal year 19, then we sorted them again to what we thought could reasonably be defended as COVID related. And that's how we generated these proposed numbers for appropriation. Clearly, if we get guidance that excludes anything, we think we've been conservative, but that excludes anything that we've assumed, those numbers will be reduced and the surplus will go right into the reserve fund. But we tried to be conservative with limited guidance that we will share with you, just like Josh's email on Monday night. We'll gather everything by Friday and send it out either on Friday or Monday to you. But it's not detailed. It's 4 general categories, and that's why you couldn't find it online. Simply not there yet. But we'll follow up with the detailed guidance as soon as we receive it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Mr. Milton, I think I'll give you last word on ARPA so we can keep our forward progress this evening. But you're on mute.
I am so sorry, I hit the wrong button again. And I'm not technically challenged, but for some reason I am. I think I'm going to hold off on the question, but I'd really like to put a pin in this for right now regarding the comment Bob said, just he wasn't sure how the internal audit would help us out. I'm just more, and I heard that we do use an outside auditor. My question is, the outside auditor, is it just to make sure 2 minus 10 equals 8, or are they verifying that the item for whatever the ARP money is used for, or whatever that might be the case, is that an appropriate amount for that type of transaction? And I'm not probably explaining it correctly, but what I want to make sure is it's more than just 2 minus 10 equals 8. I want to know, is this also an appropriate use of the money, and does it make sense for that particular budget item? And I want to keep a pin in this just for the sake that we've brought this up. I've been on the 4 or 5 years now, and it just is a constant, hey, who's verifying what, and to make sure this is appropriate use of the funds, who's double checking this? And I appreciate, Bob, you clarifying a little bit more, but really, I need a little bit more understanding of what that auditor actually does.
Okay, thank you, Member Milton. And I think I believe the staff is hearing your concern and the concerns of the members directly, and I think we'll expect to hear more, especially as if they don't have the direction yet. And I think that's where we're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place as budgeters. If they don't have the direction on how to spend it quite yet, then it's probably going to be some time before anyone could audit us on our budgeting decision. So, but again, I think we're getting to the point of how are we going to make the decision about where the money goes, and what role does the budget committee play, or how do we hand it off to the city council so they can carry out the recommendation of the budget committee? Okay, thanks for the robust discussion. Let's move on to our next agenda topic, public hearings. The next item on the agenda will be to conduct a public hearing on the proposed capital improvement plan for fiscal years 22 through 2026. I've devolved from actually having a hammer to using my phone. Okay, that's your gavel this evening. The public hearing is now open. Does the budget office have a presentation for us?
We do, thank you, Chair. Again, Josh Eggleston, the city's budget officer. I'm going to present on the city's capital improvement plan. A little background first. A capital improvement plan, or a CIP, is a 5-year plan for capital spending. Like a budget, the CIP matches expected revenues with planned expenditures, but unlike a budget, the CIP has a multi-year timeline, which is helpful when planning for large expenditures that may span multiple years. Preparation of the CIP is governed by Council Policy C9. In addition, to ORS Chapter 223 requires that projects financed by system development charges be part of an adopted financial plan. A CIP such as ours can be used to fulfill this requirement. CIP projects are identified in many ways, such as infrastructure assessments, planning processes, plan documents, and updates. For urban renewal, the master plan updates and strategic action plans provide guidance and direction for included projects, as well as discussion at advisory board meetings. The city's various infrastructure plans, such as the transportation master plan and the park system master plan, are important to the process and feed the CIP each year. Overall, the assessment of current and future infrastructure needs and repairs are weighed against available financial resources. This larger group of identified issues are then evaluated for inclusion in the CIP. The CIP public hearing is noticed to the public in several ways, and often the projects that are included in the CIP are part of a master plan or other process that includes outreach to neighborhood associations or advisory boards. The CIP webpage includes information about the process and prior year CIP documents. It also includes a project request form for residents to submit projects to be considered for the CIP. And I would encourage anyone, if you have a project, it's open year round. It's not just around the public hearing. When we get to the public hearing, it's actually very late to try to add or change a project. So at any point in the year, you can submit the form and we'll make sure you get a response. In addition, on the website, it contains more information. The GIS team, which includes personnel from IT and Public Works, has updated the interactive CIP project map to help give a visual representation of the projects by type and location. You can click on the project icons and the project details will appear in a pop-up box. And then each year, like we're doing now, a public hearing is held to receive feedback on the plan. The capital planning process and timing are key elements of the city's capital planning. The CIP document itself is primarily a planning document and contains projects where likely funding sources have been identified. The projects have a cost of $50,000 or more and includes new projects or new funding sources. Projects that have been identified but don't have a source of funding remain outside of the CIP until those resources have been identified. Year 1 through 5 represent the plan period, but each individual project may have a different start year or project time span. As the process moves forward, the year 1 CIP projects flow into the proposed budget. Previously funded and carryover projects contained in the current budget will also flow into the 2022 budget. The budget will then include all year 1 CIP projects, as well as carryover and projects adopted mid-year, reappropriations, administrative costs, and all smaller capital projects that did not hit the 50,000 or more threshold used in the CIP. The majority of the CIP document is made up of individual project details, like the example on this slide. They all display a project number, the category of infrastructure, the neighborhood or neighborhood associations, title of the project, the ward or wards, the score if it has a score, the ward or wards, the funding source or funding sources if as multiple, the total by year and the total for the 5-year period, the amount funded in prior years, and then the estimated total project cost and a project description. I want to highlight several projects in this year's CIP. We have multiple large water projects that total $97.6 million relating to the algal toxins from a few years ago and resiliency of the water system. These projects include the ozone treatment facility, groundwater wells, and the Guerin Island filter number 2 reconstruction that's highlighted on the screen, operational improvements, and the aquifer storage and recovery, or ASR, improvements at the Woodmansey Park. The state is granting 20 million of the 25 million for the filter number 2 reconstruction, and the balance of the funding for these projects is revenue bonds issued in 2020 or utility rates. One of the larger projects in the CIP is the Public Works Operation Building that will replace failing buildings 2 and 14 at the Shops Complex. The current total estimated project cost is 24.5 million, being funded by utility rates. And then design and construction is moving forward with an expected groundbreaking this fall. For the actual CIP document, the total projects, $246.6 million over the 5 years, 160 individual CIP projects, 22 funding sources, and 11 separate categories of infrastructure. Something new this year, we did a display by result area. In this case, the CIP can be broken down into 3 of the 6 total results areas. You can see safe, reliable, efficient infrastructure, welcome and livable community, and strong and diverse economy. And there's more detail on page 10 of the CIP document on results areas. This slices the same amount of funding a little different way. It's by funding source. And you can see the largest funding source is utility rates, followed by Urban Renewal Agency, and then all other funding sources. This chart shows the CIP funding by the 4 major project groups. As usual, the utility makes up just about half of the CIP, followed by transportation, and then portions for community and municipal facilities. Looking at the projects by category, this first group is community facilities at just over 17 million. It's made up of 2 categories, historic structures and parks. The municipal facilities totals 28.5 million over the 5 years. It's made up of 4 categories, including airport, buildings, information technology, and parking structures. Transportation totals 77.5 million over the 5 years, and it has 2 categories of streetlights and streets, with the vast majority being for the street system. And the utility projects total 123.6 million over the 5 years, and it's made up of 3 categories of stormwater, wastewater, and water. This concludes the staff presentation for the proposed capital improvement plan. Representatives from city departments are available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Eggleston. This is generally where we would open up public testimony, provide testimony regarding the capital improvement plan, but I do not believe we have anyone signed up for testimony.
That's correct.
So we will start with Member Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, probably best for Mr. Fernandez. And I'm wondering, at the conclusion of this CIP, so the 5-year period that it covers, how far along on the modernization of our water lines and our water pipes will we be, and how much will remain to be will remain after that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor. So we will be complete with the modernization of the treatment system, out at Guerin Island, and with the aquifer storage and recovery system, with the groundwater well out at Guerin Island as well. So those pieces will be done. The rest of the utility, the rest of the water system is a constant improvement. So there's always rehabilitation and restoration work that has to be done. There's always pump stations that have to be upgraded. There's a couple of reservoirs that are in-town reservoirs that are in the plan that are not yet constructed. So it's hard to say where we would be. Where we would be in terms of the total system, because there's always a lot to do and a lot to to reconstruct. But what has been the most at the front of our minds, which has been getting the water treatment system upgraded so that it can address our current issues, algal toxins and the like, that will be completed within, in fact, those will be completed within the next 2 years.
Thank you. If I could have a follow-up, Mr. Chair. What about the lines between here and Garen Island?
Those are still, Brian Martin, who's our city engineer, is on the call, so he can come up. There is some work that's been done on that, but he can give us more details to where we're at with those.
Good evening, committee. We replaced a significant chunk of one of our water lines about 10 years ago, about 3 to 4 miles worth outside of Turner, but there still are many miles of pipeline that are old, back from the 50s and even 30s. And so we do have one project where we're connecting 2 of the main transmission lines so that we can do repairs on the 36-inch line, which was built in 1936. That's a significantly large project, and we don't even have all of that funded in this first 5 years. So that's going to go over probably 10 years before we can take care of that line.
Just to clarify, the connection will take 10 years, or the actual replacement of the 36-inch line?
The rehabilitation of the 36-inch line. We actually have the connection happening within the first 5 years.
Thank you.
Member Nordic.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 204 of our big document here. I just had some questions about parks and capital improvements. Page 204 identifies just under $60,000 in SDC fees for the Bailey Ridge Park Master Plan. I'm just curious, since that's in my ward, what that master plan entails in brief and what those funds are going to be used for.
Yeah, Councilor. So park master plans, you see them come through periodically, where we'll take the property and engage our park planner, Rob Romanek, will engage the neighbor association and the adjacent neighbors and develop a plan for how the park property will be developed. You know, are there going to be playgrounds? Are there going to be trails? Where are the trails going to be? So that's what that money would be used for. And then the master plan usually comes through for review and approval to Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, and then always ends up at council for approval. And then once those master plans are adopted, then they wait for funding. And so often we will fund portions of the master plan, whatever might be SDC eligible, and then the remainder awaits grants and other types of funding.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just to follow up.
Sure.
So a lot of my residents are very fervent believers and users of our trails system in town, and that includes Croizen and Skyline trails in my ward. I don't see anything in here that indicates any changes or industrialization of those 2 trails, which are currently heavily forested. But I just wanted to make sure that I checked with city staff that there's no plans as of this time to pave those over or make any other deforestation changes to Croizen Trail or Skyline Trail.
Not at all, Councilor.
Thank you.
Okay. Member Bennett. You're on mute.
I'm also on dark. God. There we go. Sorry. Mr. Fernandez, I wanted to check on page 41. It's the streetlight projects. We get, and I'm really sorry there isn't a public participation in this public hearing, because I'll hear about this, I think all of us will, throughout the year, the various parts of town that are underlit. The lighting isn't well liked, either new or old, and all of that. Can you kind of characterize this program? It's a sort of a flat rate program, and I thought maybe you could kind of help us characterize, will this be responding to some of the concerns we're hearing, parts of town that are unlit, parts that are overlit, all of that?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Mayor. So the streetlight fee was adopted in 2015 and implemented in 2016. It's $2. It shows up on single family residential bills, $2.80 a month, I believe. And then multifamily and commercial and industrial pay different rates. So it generates $3 million a year, more or less. We haven't raised the rates, haven't proposed to raise the rates since its implementation. So the first thing it paid for was the relamping of the entire city to LED. And then it pays for all the electric bills for streetlights and for lights in parks. And then every year we allocate about $400,000 a year for improvements to the streetlight system. So basically putting in streetlights where they don't exist in neighborhoods. And in fact, there's a whole slew of projects that just came out. I know you're copied on all the letters. So if you haven't seen them yet, all the projects for this year are out. And the way those projects have been selected is back in 2015 or 2016, we engaged a citizens committee where we laid out the criteria. The criteria was provided to council for endorsement. And then as people submit that they desire streetlights in their neighborhoods, we rank it against the criteria and they go on a list. And what we've done over the years is we take from the top of the list, areas that are near schools, areas. So there's criteria to rank them. And then we always try to take from the middle. And what I mean by that is we don't want to always take from the top for the big projects and lose out on the opportunities for just onesie twosie projects. So if you look at the projects that are coming out, there's several areas that have 10, 15, 20 streetlights, but there's some areas that only have 1 or 2 new streetlights in terms of the projects for this year. And we do that purposely.
Is that list available then to the public? How would they access that?
Oh, they can call us.
Okay, and they'll get a copy.
And they can get a copy of the list, or if they want streetlights in their neighborhood, then they can let us know, and we can put it on the list. And I'll say that we had a recent opportunity where there was a concern about the street lighting on Salem Heights Road. And that one didn't need engineering because there were already poles there. So we basically asked PGE to install the lights. So what this program allows us to do is we can get lights up actually pretty easily when the facilities, when the infrastructure already exists. And that was a situation where the neighbors were very concerned, and we were able to get street lights up within months of the request.
And will you be completing historic lamping of the downtown, street lighting of the downtown?
I do not believe that is in. I'll have engineering.
I'm just curious if
give that some thought. I don't know that that's in our current plan.
The reason I'm asking is there's every Christmas season, there's a lot of interest in lights downtown. One of our difficulties is not having electrical outlets available, and one of the relamping projects includes
the twinkle lights and that.
Yeah, so that we did do, and I see Brian Martin's on, so go ahead, Brian.
Yes, we are doing converting to LED on the decorative lights downtown, but that's just happening by our operations crews as time permits.
Great, thank you.
Member Hoy on the lights.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I was going to ask another CIP question, if I could. It's similar to.
Sure. Then Secretary Anderson after you. Thank you.
Mr. Fernandez, will this CIP repair some of the sidewalks in the city, all of the sidewalks in the city, or what? And if it won't do all of them, which
you didn't tell me you were going to sidewalks.
Yeah. If it doesn't repair all the sidewalks in the city, how close will we get, and why won't it? Could you explain why it might not?
Sure. Yes, Councilor Hoy, this CIP will not repair all of the sidewalks in town. So sidewalk repair is actually in the operating budget, which as soon as we're done with CIP, you'll be hearing about. There's about $2 million a year to fund our crews that do nothing but sidewalk repair year round. Projects, I don't recall, and again, Brian can very quickly tell us, I don't recall if there are any specific sidewalk improvements in the CIP, but there may be some street projects that would include sidewalk construction as a part of that. So reasons why not. First of all, there is a tremendous amount of missing sidewalk in town and sidewalk that's in disrepair. The council made a decision, a policy decision many years ago that every sidewalk that was built prior to 1992, the city would repair before turning it over to the property owner for their maintenance. We inspected all of the sidewalks. We have diligently been repairing those sidewalks and returning them to property owners. But at $1 million, we estimate there's probably $50 million worth of repairs out there. And that's just sort of a thumbnail. We're spending $2 million a year, and some of that has to go to improve ADA ramps that were really not part of the original program, but that's just a requirement that we have to do to maintain our, keeping our ADA, our infrastructure ADA compliant. So we're a long ways off before we be done. Brian, you want to add to?
Yeah, I was just going to back up. The only improvements for sidewalk in the CIP are with street projects. And there is one project on page 52, McClay Road Southeast and Kaplan Road Southeast. There's some pedestrian crossings and some missing sidewalk that's going to be added to the system.
I will say that when we do, when we have bond issues, like we had the 2008 Streets and Bridges bond issue, every project improvement that for a street that doesn't have sidewalks, they automatically come with sidewalk improvements. So we advance the cause quite a bit when there's a bond issue. So at some point in the near future, I hope we'd have a lot more sidewalk projects in the CIP.
Thank you.
Secretary Anderson, you're in the queue. Is it on sidewalks or?
It was on streetlights as well as on sidewalks.
All right, let's have it then.
Okay. My first one is the streetlights, and we kind of are slipping in and out of capital improvement versus operating budget, but streetlights has come up. So, and you're the man to answer both questions, or both areas, Peter. Why do we have debt service on the streetlight fund? That's page 133 of the operating budget. I mean, I thought we have the streetlight fee that is supposed to be paying for the streetlights as we put them in.
Right. Thank you. That's a great question, Councilor Anderson. One of the decisions that was made early on, in fact, it was part of the original proposal, is that we would relamp everything right away, go from high pressure sodium to LED. So part of the financial analysis that we did was that we would take a borrowing to be able to afford, because remember that the streetlight fee fund started at $0. So we wanted to be able to do that relamping right away, because we would then have the savings from the energy savings to be able to afford everything. So the borrowing was for that.
This is kind of a Ron Sturba question, but does do the energy savings, are they more than what we're paying to service our debt?
Oh yeah, significantly.
Okay, yes, that's good.
Yes, yeah, that was all built in. The finance department did a lot of analysis before we even came to council with that, back in 2014.
Okay, Chair Tigan, now I have a question on the sidewalks, and then I'll yield the floor to anybody else who wants to ask some questions, but I have another series of questions on.
Thank you.
This is on page 143 plus of the operating budget. I look at this, and under the utility fees, we can pay for road surface maintenance. So I'm just wondering, why are not our sidewalks allowed to be paid for under the utility fund as opposed to the operating fund? If we can pay for road surface maintenance under utilities, why can't we pay for sidewalks under the utilities fund?
Yeah, Councilor Anderson, that's a great question. That street maintenance is really associated with utility projects. So we go in, we're the biggest cutters of our street system.
Sure.
And when we cut the street for sewer, especially, those trenches are gigantic. So it's really about repairing that.
Okay.
When we impact the sidewalks, we repair the sidewalks as well with utility money.
Okay, but if you're road surfacing maintenance that doesn't have anything to do with cutting or anything with the utilities, that's not coming out of the utilities fund.
No.
Okay.
Sometimes I will say that sometimes we stretch a little bit. So if we come to a street that is just completely in terrible shape, we cut a hole to make it worse. Over the years, it used to be that the patch would be perfect and the rest of the street would be a mess. We, over the years, have said, hey, we can stretch a little bit, and we can't do a full repair, but we try and make the street a little better as a part of that project.
Why don't you cut a hole in the sidewalks then when you're doing that?
Whenever we do meters, you get a brand new sidewalk, except it's only one panel.
Okay, thank you. We'll have member Stapleton, then member Brown.
Thank you. My question is about, you have these really great pie charts, at the beginning and of each section about projects by category and projects by funding source. And I'm just curious about wanting to make sure that we have equity across the city and across all the different wards. So I would love to see pie charts at the beginning as well to represent which wards are getting the investments, to make sure that we're spreading the money around for every ward to get new parks investments and different things like that. And I would also love to see it in the transportation section, out by car versus public transportation versus pedestrian versus bike, so that we can really get a full understanding of where our investments are going. And it would just be really great to have that visual of all of this information. There's a ton of information in this, all very, very good. But I would love to see that visual.
Yeah, and I think that's easy to do, Councilor. We track by ward, so that's in the document. We just haven't developed the pie chart, and we could certainly develop the pie chart for mostly pedestrian versus mostly automobile related or what have you. We can certainly produce those things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Brown.
Thanks, Chair. And this is a good follow-up to Councilor Stapleton. And it's not about the sidewalks and it's not about the lights. It'll probably encompass that. But she mentioned the word equity, and I think I'm going to go there. This is a conversation that the city manager and I have had a couple times before, the chief of police. Speaking as a man of color, a Black African-American man, and I'm looking at the little squares, and unless someone has me completely fooled, I think I'm the only Black man in this little group, unless someone has some really good tricks out there. But being a person of color, what I'm trying to understand is, have we created an equity lens? And so I'm bringing this conversation back to this particular group, because if anyone can pull this off, well, I think it's going to be this group here. And when I think of the equity lens, I know this is a project that we have partnered with, from the Human Rights Commission to the Police Review Board and Director Fernandez, and we've talked about it before. So when we think about the spending and we think about the sidewalks and the lights, and we're trying to distribute funding to all the different wards, is there an equity lens that can be created that goes with this? So even if you're not a person of color, can you still look in this and see yourself? Because Salem is growing. We're booming and bursting at the seams. We have a wide variety of families relocating here, not only because of the school district, but because of housing. Salem is a wonderful place to live, and more people of color are coming here. So my question is, how are we going to build and create an equity lens when it comes to funding?
Yeah, Dr. Brown, I think those are great comments. We have typically we've guided ourselves in two ways, but there's certainly room for improvement. So I want to say that from the outset. We have always guided ourselves to make sure that money is spread by ward, so that it's not just Ward 7, Ward 4, Ward 1 that's getting everything. In fact, projects are being spread around, whether they're capital projects. You know, if it's even a repair, we typically will look at worse situations, but we want to make sure that the entire community is being served. The other thing that we have is because we accept federal funding, we have to be Title VI compliant. So Title VI forces a certain level of equity review and making sure that that we are outreaching to communities and that we're doing things properly. But that there's room for improvement. There's absolutely room for improvement. I'm delighted to let you know that the city manager assigned me the task of leading the corporate DEI efforts, and purchasing and projects are going to be one of the things that we looked at. So we will certainly look to see. I think we have a start, but like I said, I think we can do better.
Well, I definitely want to offer my services when it comes to creating a plan and helping the mayor out. When I think of DEI work, we know that's essential. And having to listen to the mayor for the past several years, there's a lot of good work that's happening. And when I think about an equity lens, I think it just helps us. If someone were to say to us, Mr. Mayor, can you show me your equity lens? Like if I were to call Superintendent Perry and I ask for her equity lens, I know I can see it. I have a copy of it here on my desk. If I were to call, the NAACP, whatever organization, their organizations in today's culture are being guided and led by an equity lens. And so I just think it's something that this group, we really need to consider as we think about funding. And also we think about ARPA, those funds have trickled down. And I think there's a great accountability when we are utilizing an equity lens to know where those funds are going. So I definitely am here. My hands are open, and however I can best support the cause, Mr. Mayor and of course, Director Fernandez, please let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate your offer, Dr. Brown. I know we chatted about, you took an interest at the January meeting about how we were helping people with the who were having trouble paying the utility bills, and we had a couple of conversations, and you met with Margot Williams, our customer service manager, and I know she attended one of your NAACP meetings. So thank you for your offer to help, and we will certainly be reaching out to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I want to just take a moment of privilege as the chair and just and build on the conversation a little bit, because and Mr. Fernandez, you mentioned the utility, the inability to pay utilities, and there's a commonality there with the streetlights, which is that the city's tack on it. And I know this isn't budgeting, this is a bit operational, but I guess I want to just point it out while we're having the conversation. The city's approach is, well, let's ask people. And that feels really open and transparent, but we're not always 100% in getting to every member of the community that might respond to that question if it was asked. And I think that that's part of what Dr. Brown's saying. I feel like that's what I'm hearing is, what does it take to ask in a way that many people in our community, so many people in our community would be able to respond? And if we looked at the data of where do people ask for streetlights, are we also asking ourselves, where are people not asking for streetlights? And are they not asking because it's really well lit there? Or are they not asking because they don't know that this program exists? They have no idea what public works are. They are just trying to make it. And I think that that's part of what an equity lens might bring us, is other ways to ask and engage the community. So I'll leave my comment at that. Member Bennett?
I'm just going to say that, and effective neighborhood groups and engaged city councilors can also bring a lot of information to the table. I'm frankly, given my mail, I'll just do an aside, given the mail I get, that there is not one person here testifying about the capital improvement plan, and half the discussion's been about the operating budget. So I certainly go along with Dr. Brown's suggestion. I think if that lens will bring more people to the table who have not been to the table, we need to get on it because they're sure not coming from anywhere else right now.
Thank you, Member Bennett. I have a general question to get us back onto the CIP. Director Fernandez, what I noticed about the CIP this year is that the 2022 year is twice as large as every other planning year subsequent in the plan. I couldn't go back into my notes and scratch my memory to know, is that usually how it is, or are we just in a phenomenal year for capital improvement in the city?
So it happens that way, and periodically you'll see, we pass a bond issue. So when we had the good fortune that the police bond passed and the library bond passed, all of a sudden there were, $80 million, in the CIP and stacked up in a year or two. We had the good fortune of the state of Oregon providing us $20 million to do improvements at Guerin Island that, we were hoping, but weren't anticipating. So all of a sudden, those pennies from heaven show up and the CIP gets stacked up. When we don't, and we are fortunate as a community that we get that, those dollars from other sources seem to show up periodically. If they weren't showing up, then you'd see a more steady CIP. We are always allocating, we have a goal of allocating, $20 million, every year from the utility fund at a minimum to the capital fund so that we can do utility projects. So you'd see that steady and other places where there's the streetlight fee, there's 400,000 that every year goes to it. So if we didn't have those other sources coming in, then you'd see a steady thing. But man, those other monies come in and, they're great things for the city of Salem. And then that's why you see the CIP jumping around.
Thank you. Secretary Anderson.
Thank you. And Chair Tigan, you had the same question that I had related to a specific line. I look at the drop-offs in municipal facilities. There's a drop-off in city buildings. There's a drop-off in utilities. There's a drop-off in wastewater. There's a drop-off in water. And it doesn't always happen next year. It might happen in 2024, and then it starts to build gradually up again. But it's pretty significant sometimes, going from, double digit in millions to single digit in millions. So is that explanation you gave, Chair Tigan, true across the board?
Yeah, it is, Councilor Anderson. In fact, for municipal facilities, I'll open it up, and then I don't know if the city manager will want to jump in, but we made a decision. It was actually championed by now retired Human Resources Director Hansen that, the City Hall needed work. And so we figured out how to take a $3 million borrowing to do a bunch of work at City Hall. So that would have bumped up, the CIP for a small period of time, but that was a one-shot situation. So those kinds of things happen, and they happen everywhere. And that's why you see these bumps. And I would anticipate that next year, the year after, new money shows up of these kinds of things, and then you'll see those bump ups again. It's just that when you get out to the fourth and fifth year, a lot of times we're just not sure, or those monies haven't materialized yet.
Sure, got it. I assume that you're going to see those changes because you're forecasting out 5 years, and who knows what's going to happen in 5 years. Chair Tigan, I have another question on the CIP. I'm looking at page 43, which is Lone Oak Bridge. I almost hesitate to ask this, but where are we on that project? I mean, we've been back and forth on so many things with the reimbursement district. What happened when, the project's engineers talked to the city engineers 15 years ago and all that other kind of stuff. So where are we on that?
we're not gonna cover that old ground.
No,
unless Member McCoy wants to cover that ground.
And that's why I ask it and not Member McCoy.
So actually, there is good news on that front. You know, that project ultimately awaits development. There is a substantial subdivision that actually was at council a meeting or two ago because they had replatted, which is south of the bridge. So the southern portion of Lone Oak, from its, I forget the name of the street, but from its southern tip up to the existing sections is going to be under construction here within the next couple of years because of that subdivision. And then that also pays into the reimbursement district that gets the bridge a little further. So the southern half is going to be done. Okay. And the northern half is done, and now we just await the money to get the actual bridge done.
Is that new subdivision? I saw it when it came through council, and I kept quiet then. But is hard thing for me to do. But is that 100% reimbursement or 50% or 75?
Oh gosh. You know, unfortunately, Councilor Anderson, Glenn Davis is not on the call who could give it to you to the penny.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Anderson. Member Stapleton, I see your hand.
Thank you so much. I had two questions, and real quick, on page 51, we have 500,000 set aside for pedestrian crossing programs. How many pedestrian crosswalks would that amount of money create?
I think we know exactly what that is, and if Brian Martin will come back up, I think he has that count.
Is that the three projects I think that are listed in the giant book over here?
Yeah, tell me my page numbering. I printed mine out, so I don't have the same CIP that you do. What's the project number that you're looking at?
Let me see here. Project number 0001145.
Yeah.
Program.
Yeah, so I believe there are 4 crossings associated with that, but Brian, go ahead if you have the exact.
We don't have an exact number on that project. That's a placeholder for ones we're still trying to evaluate. We do have other crossings in the budget that are specifically already designated, and those are, some of them are coming in new in this first year, and So we have some specifically designated, and then this funding here is for more to be evaluated and added in this budget year.
Do you have a handle on, I'm sorry, Councilor Stapleton, how much are they running us? They're running 100, 200,000?
Yeah, about 125,000 a piece.
About 125,000 a piece is what they're running. So that gives you a sense of, we're probably looking at four crossings with that $500,000.
Okay. And I did speak here because prior years we had another 325. So we have a total of 825,000. I wanted to make sure that was clear for everybody. Okay, so for across the whole city, we're looking at a handful of new pedestrian crosswalks. And I know that this is important because we have a lot of pedestrian fatalities or injuries that are happening. So, and I also wanted to note, because this is my first time, in next year, when I get this, I see here that there's no funding scheduled out for the following 4 years. So will that change next year? I'm guessing that it will, but I just wanted to clarify.
So for example, looking at 1145, if we identify projects, not if, I'm certain we will, then we'll lay them out. So this money, if this drops completely into the construction budget, then you'll see it in the construction budget. If it doesn't drop completely into the construction budget and we want to space them out, then you'll see, so you'll either see the projects laid out here, or you'll see the projects listed in the construction budget.
Okay. And then, Chair, if it's okay, I have a question,
Sure.
Kind of going into the water part of this. And earlier when we had our ice storm, we had problems because we didn't have enough generators. Are getting generators for all of our pump houses, is that included in this year's CIP?
Oh, I don't know. Brian, do we have any?
It is not, they are not included in this year's CIP.
Okay.
Okay, currently we have 3, but we don't have all covered.
Okay, and we have a total of 5 pump houses?
Oh no, we have a lot of.
Okay, I'm reaching.
Yeah, we have a lot of pump stations. We have a lot of water pump stations and sewer pump stations. A lot of them have generators. Generators are very expensive.
Yes.
So it's just part of upgrading the system to include them, but they're they're in our plans as the storm in February was extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
So in extraordinary circumstances, then we have to do extraordinary things. But in the day-to-day, which is what we're planning for, we do have them scheduled to put in over time, so that all of our pump stations are modernized and have those kinds of amenities.
Okay, thank you.
Director Fernandez, I guess I wanted to acknowledge a success in the CIP since I've been a budget committee member, and then follow it up with the question. And the success is about the Union Street family-friendly bikeway. I guess right when I started on here, that was identified for funding 3 years out, and then the next year it was 2 years out, and then you funded it last year. And over the last year, we've seen improvements. I guess maybe it's 2 years now. We've seen improvements to that. It's not on the CIP this year, I assume, because all the money that we thought we were going to spend on it has been budgeted, even if it all hasn't been spent.
Right.
That's super exciting. Like, just as someone who lives a block off of that and travels that with my family, it's great. Still needs some work. There's a couple intersections there that are still pretty harrowing with children. But I trust that we're moving forward on it, and so that's cool. And maybe this has something to do also with like the Ward 1 parks. As your Ward 1 guy, I'm not just your chair, I'm your Ward 1 guy. We don't have a lot of Ward 1 park projects in the CIP, and they're pretty built out. And maybe if you're going to improve something to them, it's less than $50,000, so it doesn't make it. But the question I'm getting to is the Maple Winter Bikeway, which was a project that we had talked about and the council had talked about. And I guess I'd like to see that same success that we see in the Union move on the Maple Winter. And I know this isn't the time to add projects to the CIP, but it was a little bit disappointing that it's not even 3 years out or 4 years out. It's just not even on the CIP.
Yeah, so I appreciate you asking about it. By the way, we just spent something like $8 million on a Ward 1 park. It just happens to be Riverfront Park. So.
Right. Well, and it's designated as all. That's a city, and that's. I guess I'll give a little love to McRae instead of.
And so the difference between the Maple Winter Bike Lane and the Union Street family-friendly facility is that Union Street is in an urban renewal area. And so a lot of the funding for that project came from the URA. And then we were fortunate that that project had been around for a little while. So we were able to get, I think, some federal dollars as well. So that combination, we were able to fund that. At Maple Winter, we have done a lot of improvements to get started, but there's still, I think we've invested, I just heard it, $1 million plus or minus, but there's several $1 million left to invest. There's just no money for it. But what that does is because these plans are adopted, I know it's frustrating, but with the plans adopted, our staff is always on the lookout for grants and for some of these, without a bond issue, then we're out hunting for money, and we can hunt for, there's grants for pedestrian crossings and there's grants for a lot of these kinds of things, and we can show that there's an adopted plan that actually we're able to rank higher in a lot of these grant opportunities. But we just got to wait as they come and compete with them or compete for them, because there's no other source of funds barring a future bond issue or working through the federal process, through Salem Kaiser Area Transportation Study. But we get in line. I mean, we're looking at projects to be funded, I believe, in 2024 or 25.
Right.
So we get in line, and those funds ultimately come in, but we have to be very patient.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Other questions from the committee regarding the CIP in particular? Secretary Anderson.
Thank you. This is for IT Chair Namburi, and I hope she's here. We've been talking a long time about a project for IT, Wi-Fi downtown and how that works. And I keep asking if we could expand that to the whole city, Wi-Fi for the whole city. And I see nothing about that in here. And I'm wondering, is that ever going to happen? And I don't really care right now about the status of what's going on downtown, because that's already, it's not the future thing, it's happening now. So do we have any future plans in our capital improvement to do something about free Wi-Fi?
So, Councilor Anderson, Krishna Namburi, IT Director. So thank you for that question. So we did go through a feasibility study, kind of putting that aside as far as the question of whether we can expand that.
Krishna, you're cutting in and out. I'm not sure what.
Oh, hold on one second. Can you hear me better? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. So we did go with a feasibility study in downtown to identify if there is an interest for a faster broadband in downtown. Putting that study aside, because we can't really compare the study that we did in downtown to the rest of the city. I think as of today, what we are looking at is through different funds that are actually coming, especially with the ARPA funding, and broadband is actually back on the list. So what we are actually looking at right now is to further evaluate and identify the criteria for which we could be expanding this broadband. So we haven't really we don't have the criteria with us yet, but we are actually in the process of, myself and Chuck Fauser and Courtney Knox, we are actually started the discussions about what it looks like if the city decides to expand it to the rest of the city. So we're still in the initial stages of discussions, I guess. That's the best I can describe it right now.
And when you say ARPA funding, you mean a different line item of ARPA funding entirely than the $33-some million that the city received directly?
I'm sorry, say that again.
I just want to make a clarifying point. You said that there may be ARPA funding to go after broadband expansion within the city, but that's a different program than the $33 million that we've been talking about as a committee that replaces revenue lost to the city.
Right, it could be.
Okay.
Based on how the criteria is defined.
It could be part of the 33 million, yes.
Because one of the line items that is described as that could be eligible for that funding is the broadband infrastructure. There are also other fundings that could be coming for that infrastructure maintenance also. So it could be part of the 32 million, or it could be outside of that too, depending on the availability of those other funds.
Thank you. Okay, if we have run through the gamut of the CIP, I can wait uncomfortably. You know that as me as your chair. Okay. At this point, I would entertain a motion from the floor recommending the proposed. Oh,
you do need to close the hearing.
Oh, sorry. My method acting of someone who enjoys city budgeting and reads scripts fell on me, that one. Public hearing is now closed. Thank you. Back to the script. May I have a motion recommending the proposed fiscal year 22 through fiscal year 2026 capital improvement plan to the city council for adoption. I've got a motion from Member Anderson.
Second.
A second from Secretary Anderson. What a team.
Yeah, we stick together.
Team Anderson.
Is there any additional discussion than that which we've already had with the city staff? Okay. All those in favor of accepting the motion to recommend the fiscal year 2022 through fiscal year 2026 capital improvement plan to the city council for adoption, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. Seeing no votes, we will accept it as the motion approved unanimously, and it passes. Thank you. All right, we are now at item number 7 on the agenda this evening. Take a stretch break while I read. Budget Officer Eggleston will now present 3 items to us: the Urban Renewal Agency proposed budget, the Strong and Diverse Economy Service Area, and the Safe, Reliable, and Efficient Infrastructure Service Area. Due to the links between the Urban Renewal Agency proposed budget and the Strong and Diverse Economy Service Area budget, questions for both will be taken at the conclusion of the Strong and Diverse Economy section of the presentation. Rather than introducing Josh each time, we will allow him to begin the second half of his presentation when there are no further questions or discussion regarding the Urban Renewal Agency proposed budget and the Strong Diverse Economy Service Area budget. Your break's now over. Josh, start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because of the connection between the programs and projects funded by the Salem Urban Renewal Agency and the city's activities support economic development, the Urban Renewal Agency budget and the result area of Strong and Diverse Economy will be reviewed together. The URA budget can be found in Budget Book 2, and the city result area for Strong and Diverse Economy can be found on page 149 in your larger book. There are 2 sections that make up the Strong and Diverse Economy area, as I mentioned, city funds and the Urban Renewal Agency funds. The result area on the screen is the city portion of the budget and comprised of 7 city funds totaling $12.8 million in proposed funding. There are 31.21 full-time equivalent positions within this result area's programs. The Salem URA is a distinct corporation with the mayor and city council serving as its board of directors and the city manager as its executive director. City staff, primarily in the urban development department, support urban renewal programs through an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Salem. The 8 urban renewal areas are featured on this slide from north to south. They are North Gateway, formed in 1990 and is the largest at 926 acres. Riverfront Downtown is the oldest area, formed in 1975. West Salem was formed in 2001. Jory Apartments is the newest area and was formed in 2020. South Waterfront was formed in 2007 and includes a portion of Minto Island. McGilchrist was formed in 2006. Fairview was formed in 1984, is no longer collecting tax increment with approximately $2.5 million left. Mill Creek, the final URA, was formed in May of 2005. The Tax Allocation Bond Fund or Debt Service Fund, beginning on page 13 of the URA agency book, includes the tax increment revenues realized in each individual urban renewal area. The expenditure budget for this fund is just over $17 million. The Tax Allocation Improvement Fund or the Capital Improvements Fund. We just talked about the CIP. This is the URA portion of its capital construction. Begins on page 23 and funds construction or improvement projects, grants, or other urban renewal priorities by receiving the proceeds from the long-term or short-term borrowings in the debt service fund. The total expenditure budget proposed for fiscal year 2022 is $70.6 million. Details about projects in each URA area are included in this section of the budget publication. Operational revenues and expenditures of the agency-owned Salem Convention Center are accounted for in the Convention Center Fund, beginning on page 57. Convention Center revenues derived from food sales and room and equipment rentals have been negatively impacted, as you might expect from the pandemic. Year-to-date revenues in the current fiscal year through March are just 3% of what they were during the same period in fiscal year 2020. This unprecedented situation may require a transfer from the gain loss reserve to cover an operational loss for the first time since the convention center's opening, and revenues are not expected to move back to pre-pandemic levels in next year's budget proposal, which includes an expenditure budget of $2.4 million. The Downtown Parking Fund and Cultural Tourism Fund were both negatively impacted also by the pandemic. As mentioned in the budget message, there was a significant loss of revenue in the parking fund, mostly from the reduction in parking permits downtown. TOT, or transient occupancy tax revenue, in the Cultural and Tourism Fund is also down considerably from historic trends. A level of recovery is included in the revenue expectations for both funds, but lower revenue is still anticipated in fiscal year 2022. In the proposed budget, these funds will be bolstered by an allocation in the proposed ARPA fund usage of $3.2 million for the Cultural Tourism Fund and $500,000 for the Downtown Parking Fund. As restrictions continue to ease, more visitors and employees should come to the city and downtown, which will improve revenue collections. City staff will continue to monitor and communicate the status of these funds. A few highlights: Fork 40, which has a food hall on the ground floor, was a result of a restoration and renovation of the 440 State Street building. This mixed-use development also includes commercial retail units, storage and rental housing units in the basement and on the second floor. The Don Forling Creamery expanded its business to Salem with a grant from the North Gateway Urban Renewal Area as city site reuse and revitalization grant. A long vacant building on the Portland Road is now home to a growing cheese-making and ice cream business. Despite the pandemic, grant-sponsored cultural events and activities that were still able to be held received their full allocation from grants. Santa was behind plexiglass at the carousel, and the Deepwood Estate celebrated its 125th anniversary. Also in 2020, Salem opened Redwood Crossings, a collaborative project designed to address homelessness through a permanent supportive housing and transitional respite care. The Arches program provides on-site support services at the 37-unit housing complex. And with that, staff are now available for questions on the strong and diverse economy results area and the urban renewal area.
Thank you, Mr. Eggleston. Questions from the floor on the urban renewal areas and budget area. Start with Member Nordyke and then Member Chirac.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a quick question I want to ask of our city staff. Are urban renewal area funds available to assist with security and lighting issues for businesses? For example, I've talked with a number of business owners who have security issues and would like to know if there's funding available for things like installing security cameras, installing lighting in alleyways and such. And I would just like the city staff to share a little information for any of the business owners in the area who may be watching our meeting tonight.
Hi, Kristen Rutherford, Urban Development Director. The answer to that question is yes. Within our Riverfront Downtown Urban Renewal Area, we do have a grant program specifically for that purpose. It has been very actively used over the last couple of years. It's being rebudgeted again in next year's proposed budget. We don't have a similar grant program in our other urban renewal areas. We haven't received the same kind of interest in other urban renewal areas for those services or those kinds of improvements as we have downtown. This grant program came out of the task force that we convened a couple of years ago to look at solutions to mitigate the impacts of homelessness downtown. So that's why it's specific to the Riverfront Urban Renewal Area.
Okay, and I have one follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Of course.
So, Director Rutherford, thank you so much. I know that we have used city funds in the past to purchase land or perhaps even buildings to find places to help house our unsheltered, to remove folks from the lack of safety from the streets and give people a place where they can go that is indoors. And I know we've used that for the Portland Road shelter that's currently going up. Are there any plans in these books indicating any future interest in using urban renewal funds for other similar purchases to help reduce homelessness, at least temporarily, in the Salem area?
Yeah, so the Portland Road property was not purchased for housing or shelter because of the environmental contamination on the site. It was purchased for future redevelopment as a potential business incubator space, but we were able to get DEQ approval for interim use as shelter. We do have funds allocated in our North Gateway Urban Renewal Area budget and plan, and in downtown for purchasing or contributing to affordable housing development. We don't have funds specifically set aside for funding shelter operations. So to do that would require plan amendments, but it's something that could be done within each of those urban renewal plans or others.
Okay, and so if we want to explore that possibility, I know that, you know, homelessness actually declined just before the pandemic happened. I saw, I think it was OPB article. So the efforts we've made have been helping, but we all know that the pandemic has brought on, and the wildfires have brought on, increases in homelessness for a lot of folks through no fault of their own. So I'm absolutely interested in exploring through the appropriate public meetings process how we can continue to find ways to, you know, get folks off the streets and into some stable place. So look forward to discussing that further in further meetings.
Yes, and what we have done is added as eligible for grant funding or for development as affordable housing. So looking at supporting that longer term solution rather than the interim solution.
I'm on board with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rutherford. Member Chirac.
Thank you. On page 157, tourism promotion, 783,000. Could you kind of explain what's in that? I'm talking about diverse economy section.
Yes, I believe that's the allocation to Travel Salem, our destination marketing organization for the city. They receive, go ahead.
Why didn't they have anything in the fiscal year? Nothing's listed.
I think that's due to the program allocations. They did receive their 25% in the prior year, as they will in the current year and next year. It's part of our obligation to them. I'll look into where that went and what program it might be tucked into for last year or the current year.
Thank you.
Member Stapleton, then Secretary Anderson.
Thank you. Just to get my head wrapped around this, Kristen, in your proposed budget for the Urban Renewal Agency, there's some really awesome and exciting projects listed here. Is there any kind of timeline that's attached to those, or are they just kind of as it happens to happen?
Is there a specific project that you are interested in?
No, I'm actually just trying to, you know, as first timer here, just trying to understand the lay of the land.
Yes. So we've got a couple of different categories of projects that are included within our budgets. We've got those that are grant related, and those we budget every year, and we go through approving grant requests, you know, as they roll in throughout the year, as long as we have funds available. We also have capital improvement projects that are included in our budget. And those you will also see some crossover with the CIP budget that was just approved. So the way our program works is that we will allocate funding for some of the, you know, the CIPs, and then work through the planning and design, and then get it placed in the CIP for construction. So that's kind of the process that we go through there. We also have some other projects that are more facility related that won't show up in the CIP. They're handled in through, you know, different contracting or through the city's facilities department.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I was noticing that there was some money set aside for Union Street family and which I know is in your district, kind of just barely or part of it. So that was fun to see. And then I just have one more question about downtown, Director, and that is on page 161 in our large book here. We don't have anything budgeted for downtown clean team this year. And I know that this is, you're laughing already. This is a struggle for us. And I don't know, I'm guessing, because you all are in this with me and all of us, I'm guessing that this has moved to a different category and is being accounted for somewhere else.
So yes, we've had some back and forth on the parking fund, and the clean team is funded through the parking fund. And as we were heading in early into budget development, and having the large gap from lost revenue, there were things that were being included and not included, and things moving from this funding source to other funding sources. But we do intend to maintain the clean team and cleaning services.
That's great news. Thank you so much.
Okay, Secretary Anderson, then Member Bennett.
Thank you. I've got a tot question, and my question relates to the actual fee on that, or the tax on use of hotel rooms in the city is 9%. It's been that amount for the whole time I've been on the council and maybe before. I'm just wondering, how does that compare with other cities in terms of percentages?
I don't have that information. Director Wright, do you have that?
Hi, Josh and Councilor Anderson. I'm afraid I don't have that information either, so we'll have to get those comparables for everyone and bring it back at the next meeting.
I mean, I know that Ashland is higher than that, taking advantage of people who go to the Shakespeare Festival, but I don't know, what's normal for cities. What does Portland do? What does Eugene do? And how does that compare? And I think that might be interesting, not necessarily for this budget cycle, but for some other, this council would have to make that decision at some point if we want to raise it.
Excellent.
Thank you, Secretary Anderson. Member Hoy, did you want to speak to that directly before I go to Member Bennett?
I do. I just have a quick comment, and that's just to remind Member Anderson that we also have the tourism promotion area that we approved on top of the tot. So the tot isn't the only amount to look at. It's that other amount that's on top of that as well.
Good clarification. Member Bennett.
Yeah, I'll just add to that just real quickly too. When you look at other municipalities that use transient occupancy tax, you'll find that they use it for very different things than we do. We have actually specifically allocated areas we spend the money in, where in Newport, they kind of run the city off it. And you'll find real different ways of doing it. So it'll be interesting to see if we can get to apples and apples on that thing. The only question I have, it was mentioned, I think Dr. Brown mentioned, we have a pretty vibrant economy here and have had, but we also have downtown and in some parts of the town, closed buildings. We have some vacant areas. I'm really curious in the urban renewal, how much of this money is allocated or there for opportunities that might occur where something's happening and we've got to jump in fairly quickly. How do you handle that in this budget?
Absolutely. We have a line item that of $2 million for property acquisition and renovation for opportunity purchases. Okay. If there's something that we need to jump on right away. We also have an ending fund balance that and contingency that could be reallocated if there was something that we needed to move on.
So if someone comes in needing a partner to redevelop pennies with housing and retail or whatever it looks like, would that be the kind of place we would become involved?
We could use those funds, but we also have 3.7 million in our capital improvements grant program.
Okay.
So that we could bring funding to that sort of a project.
So when you add that up, you're sitting on about 8 million, or how much do you have to work
between those two items alone? We've got just under $6 million.
Okay. And then there's other funds that have opportunity built into them as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's always opportunity as we are scheduling projects out and the timing of projects where we could shift money from a project that is still going to be another year down the road and reallocate it. But we also did long-term debt this last year to position ourselves for some of these larger projects that are coming in downtown.
Okay, great. So you are anticipating then substantial work downtown. Are there other parts of town we'll be seeing? One thing you did this past year that I thought was that, and the council as the Urban Renewal Agency did with you was the North Campus redevelopment project as a kind of mini urban renewal area. Are you looking at more of those?
We are. We've received interest about doing that again. Yes.
Have you?
Mm-hmm.
The Hillcrest has been sold. Have they contacted us about any kind of assistance out there? They're doing drug and alcohol, potentially mental health. Or have they talked to us at all?
Not about assistance. I've had a couple of different conversations with them about, potential partnerships for building affordable housing out in that location, but not about assistance. So we don't have, they're not within an urban renewal area. We would have to do a modification to one of our existing urban renewal areas and pull that property in to be able to use urban renewal resources.
Okay, thank you.
Member Lewis, did you have a question? You're okay. Member Phillips, please.
Thank you, Chair Tigan and Director Rutherford. I have some questions as a new, council member and a member of this committee as well. The Fairview district is different because I'm under the impression it's mature and we're no longer collecting anything. And so I'm trying to understand the roughly $2.4 to $2.5 million that are left over. The way that it's accounted for in this, is it like, do we have a sense of exactly how we're going to spend it, or are we just accounting for what's left so that we have the ability to spend it when projects come along?
So yes, that's right. So this is money on the books from past revenue generation. So we completed our projects within that urban renewal area several years ago, and we reached our maximum indebtedness there several years ago. So we had to stop collecting tax increment, and all that tax increment now it goes to all the taxing districts as if the urban renewal area isn't there. It still officially exists because we have this $2.5 million cash on hand, and we're still, going through the decision process about how to best use those funds. So because Fairview is pretty much built out, we don't have the grant need out there that we do within other urban renewal areas. What we do have is need on the airport for additional infrastructure. So we were holding off on these funds until we completed our airport business plan to look if there might be a nexus and some opportunity there where those funds could be used to stimulate some new development and business growth on the airport. So that's where we are right now in looking at those funds. There has been some community interest in using those funds in other locations. Doing, if we were to do an amendment of some type to bring in more acreage, to do that up in the Hillcrest area. The issue is because of the size of that urban renewal area, we could bring in about 3.9 acres under a simple process. To bring in more acreage is called a substantial amendment, and that's a much more complicated process. It takes about a year. It requires consultation and approval from other taxing districts. So the goal would be, however we use those funds, we either use them within the existing urban renewal area, or we use them in an expanded boundary that falls under that 3.9 acre threshold. So those are kind of our options there. Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Are there questions on the URA or this section of the budget? Director Rutherford, last year we discussed the navigation center on this similar evening. I see that it's not in the budget in any way that it was last year because we budgeted it. I wondered if you'd give us an update and also if there's information you have regarding funds coming from the state and how it would be operated.
Yes, so we had put money into last year's urban renewal budget because there was a property of interest that would have been a good location for an acquisition. The property owners have decided that they don't want to sell the property. And so because we don't have another viable candidate within the urban renewal area that would really work well for a navigation center, we've removed it from the budget and then have reallocated funds to other things like our grant program and opportunity purchases. We are still looking at locations. I don't know that we would find one within an urban renewal area, but we're still, actively scouring and looking for that. In terms of the funding through the state, that we're looking at getting operational funds from the state, and that's looking very promising. We should know, I would say, within the next month or so, whether or not those funds are coming our direction. And at that point in time, then we could look again at opportunities within urban renewal areas or opportunities in other locations in the city where we would then have to look at other funding sources, whether the state funds or other city funds, or perhaps maybe, through ARPA funds or some of the other stimulus funds that would be coming to the city to make that kind of a purchase or do renovations.
Okay, thanks for the update.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get back to my script, make sure I know what to say next. I'll read this and you guys hang on comfortably until someone has one more question to round us out for the evening.
I can continue with safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure if that works.
That's right. We weren't going to give you a break. Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next result area, safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure, is the final result area we will be reviewing this evening, and it begins on page 127 of the larger budget book. This result area has a total budget of $137 million, approximately 21% of the total citywide expenditures. The construction funds, which we'll also be reviewing this evening, total $201.7 million, representing an additional 31% of the total expenditure budget. There are 282.8 full-time equivalent positions included in this results area. For workforce changes, there's one additional position proposed for fiscal year 2022. The systems technician would support maintenance at the utilities pump stations and reservoirs. There are several highlights for this result area, including the funding for the new operations building, increased capacity for the utility building assistance program, and improvements to the transportation system in multiple areas. As mentioned during the CIP presentation this fall, site work will begin on the new Public Works operations building at the city's shop complex. Many of the existing buildings are at the end of their useful life. This project would create a modern, efficient headquarters to replace existing building 2 and 14. During the pandemic, City Council adopted changes to the utility building assistance program for those experiencing financial hardship. The total program funding increased to $500,000 per year, and assistance per account increased to $500 annually. The income-based eligibility was expanded to include customers pre-qualified by other agencies. Through March 2021, over $135,000 in assistance has been provided to customers in need. The transportation budget is comprised of many projects for pedestrian safety and intersection, street, and sidewalk improvements. Some projects include a pedestrian island and crossing safety improvement on Sunnyview Road and Hollywood Drive, Broadway Street at Locust Street, and McClay Road at Kaplinger, and street improvements in West Salem on Snowbird Drive and Chapman Hill Drive. The ozone treatment facility at Guerin Island is currently under construction with anticipated completion by June of 2021. This powerful method can destroy bacteria and algae during the treatment process, which will ensure the city continues to provide safe water for the community. And then on the right, you see improvements to the east side Rosemont Avenue that replaced the retaining wall, asphalt pavement, curb, sidewalk, and railing. This project was funded with savings in the 2008 Streets and Bridges Bond. As a highlight, in October 2020, the Salem Public Works Department achieved full accreditation by the APWA, the American Public Works Association. This designation acknowledges Salem complies with 471 best practices and held by only 160 other agencies in the nation. Because of the extensive planning and analyst efforts by staff, the Federal Emergency Management Agency Community Rating System rate class for Salem was reduced. The result was a move from class 5 to class 4, which means a 30% discount on flood insurance premiums for affected properties in Salem. And with that, staff are available for questions on the safe, reliable, and efficient infrastructure results area. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. We'll start with Member Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Fernandez, and that's regarding the safe crossings. First of all, I'd just like to say I very much appreciate the safe crossings program. I appreciate the fact that we got one out here on Sunnyview and we're getting another one in the near future. But what I don't always like about them, though, is what it appears to be our ability to maintain them well. It seems like that's an area that often is overgrown with weeds. Maybe whatever planting has been done has been neglected. There's trash seems to collect, I think, just from the wind blowing it there. And I'm wondering if we have a plan as we increase the number of these. Do we have a plan to better maintain those, or do we need to allocate more money for that? Or maybe could you just comment on that, please?
We would just need to prioritize those a little more. It's just a never-ending struggle, Councilor Hoy. The same way that we're trying to maintain our sidewalks, trying to maintain our I said sidewalks, street trees, our pavements that need more work. This is just another piece. So, but they're important, right? They're important to the infrastructure. So we will continue to do the best that we can. We have been a little. It's our park staff that maintain the landscaping, and we have been shorthanded in that area. So some of the rights of way have looked a little rough recently, and that's just because we've lost staff and haven't been able to replace them as quickly. So there is some of that going on. We also have issues with not being able to get as many inmate crews, adults in custody crews. Now with the one prison closing, we benefited tremendously from that program. So we're trying to figure out how to, if we're going to be able to get more crews, because we get a lot of maintenance done for very little money. The city of Salem has really benefited from that program for years. So we get it. We need to do better. It's just really a resource issue.
Thank you. I would love to explore the possibility of establishing, like we have an adopt a road or street program where people can volunteer to be responsible for the trash in a particular area. I think it'd be great if we could do a similar program to adopt maybe a street crossing, and like a neighborhood group or somebody could be responsible for doing the weeding or something and take the burden off of staff. And I think that would be a really pretty easy, because it's a discrete area, not very big. People could maintain it. I would love to explore that at some point.
I think that's a great idea. We'll put up a sign. How many do you want?
Yeah, I think there are people that would be willing to do that.
That'd be fantastic. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Tomorrow's Earth Day, so no time like it. Member Stapleton.
Thank you. Yeah, Member Hoy, I've had people ask me about that. Can I just go out there and weed that? It looks horrible, whatever. And of course, I always encourage them, but to do so safely, because being out there, there's a reason why that medium is there, and that's for safety for pedestrians. So I had a couple of questions on page 143, the Public Works Emergency Operations Management. There's a decrease there, and I was wondering if that's, well, I guess what's going on there. And then I'll just ask that one and let it lie. How's that?
Yeah, so typically, I don't really have a specific response. I got my management analyst sitting here whispering in my ear. A lot of these small changes in numbers maybe one-time expenses or something reduced. So we're not reducing, there's no program reductions anywhere where you see a smaller number. It's there might have been a one-time expense or you know, maybe we had I don't think that's the case here, but in general, hey, an older employee that had a bigger family retired or moved on, and we hired a younger employee that doesn't have a family, so they end up being cheaper. You know, so there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's going on with these minor changes. But in terms of this one in particular, I don't have a handle on why exactly it's $20,000 less.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you. I just wanted to, you know, after the last year that we've had, or year and a half, when you see a reduction in emergency operations management, you kind of get a little nervous. But thank you for that. And I think, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. And if I have any more questions, I'll ask you later.
Thank you. Member Lewis?
Yes, I don't have a question, but I do want to do a shout out to the Public Works Department on the work that they did on Rosemont. That was clearly one of the most dangerous sections in the city of Salem. And now there are children walking on the sidewalk safely. And along with that, those improvements came because, quite frankly, in my opinion, of the efficiency of the Public Works Department and the extra money that they saved from the Streets and Bridges bond measure, because that improvement was not on the original bond. But because of the efficiency, we were able to do some others, including that project, and I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Lewis. That was a very frustrating project. We thought we were just going to repair a fence. And it turned out that the whole hillside was coming down, and it turned into a major project. So it took a little longer. You know, we had to read some frustrating emails, but I'm glad the picture was up there. It just looks fabulous. Thank you.
Member Chirac?
Thank you. On page 145, dealing with trust funds, the street right-of-way, 307,000. So does that include private purchases of vacated right-of-way?
So typically when someone vacates a right-of-way, they're paying us. So we're not. So it wouldn't be that. But that money, the right-of-way trust fund is there to acquire rights-of-way whenever we need them.
Yeah, oh, okay. Well, yeah, so what's the source of funding? Because I thought.
I'm sorry, Roz. Go ahead.
Well, in the trust fund, normally it's, you know, like it says, donations and other revenue sources. So what is the source of that 307,000?
Yeah, no, I misunderstood your question. In fact, you are correct. The primary source is when we vacate rights of way, when property owners ask for vacation, the funds that are paid to the city go into that fund. I misunderstood your question originally. You're absolutely correct.
Okay, because I thought, I mean, that has been the council policy for a long, long time.
Yes.
But I was talking to a friend just the other day. He lives on Spring Street South. It's kind of up in the Croydon Scenic area. And he was saying the city vacated some kind of stub street in there. I don't know what the name of that street was, and gave him half of the street, you know, footage, and his neighbor the other half, just gave it to him. But it was a pretty long strip, and of course it wouldn't be, you know, usable for anyone else. But when he said that, I mean, it was definitely given to those two neighboring property owners. But it just made me wonder, why it was done that way versus saying you have the opportunity to buy this if you want, because in the past, I thought it was a real wonderful idea. And Secretary Anderson, I'm blanking out. Who was our Ward 2 counselor before you ran when she moved?
Laura Tessler.
Yeah, I think she initiated the idea of property owners buying vacated right-of-way and it was banked, you know, it was set aside. And then when there was enough money, so, you know, a project would come up, usually a fairly small one. It might be a pedestrian improvement or a sidewalk. The money would be spent. And it, you know, there were these kinds of projects in every single ward, and you could actually point to a specific concrete, pardon the pun, benefit from these small purchases, private purchases of that right away. So I just thought that was a great idea. And I prefer that to the giveaway of public right away to adjacent property owners.
Yeah, so I don't know. Typically, we do charge. I don't know what the situation was at Spring Street. Just for everyone's information. So when right of way is vacated, the property owners, you at your own home, typically you own to the center of the street. So when the city vacates its rights, we're actually giving the land back to the underlying owner. So the property owner on Spring Street didn't get anything that he didn't already own. So it wasn't given away from that perspective. When there is a request made for the city to vacate its rights, to use that, for the public to use its rights, then it's the city policy to charge for vacating those rights. So yeah, I'm seeing a note here that, oh yeah, so right. So if the city initiates the vacation, again, I don't know what happened at Spring Street, but if it's the city requirement, you know, we need to vacate the right of way for reason X, then we don't charge. Then typically we will relinquish our rights, and then those properties, wherever that is, go back to the underlying property owner. But as a practice, if there's a request for whatever reason, usually by developers, then we do charge.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. We haven't gotten too many of those recently. There was a time where we were getting tons of those, and of late there haven't been a whole lot of requests.
Okay, but the 307,000, I mean, you could accomplish some things with that.
Oh, right on. Yeah, we don't, in fact, we don't have plans for that money right at the moment, but we certainly could. And in fact, I have a recollection, Roz, from years ago that we used some of that money to do that Lower LaFell parking lot and some of that street improvement, that in combination with some other monies. So I think there was money in that fund. And I think we used some of that back when we did that.
That was Kessler's reason for
That's a long time coming.
doing that project. Yeah.
We can probably think of some projects.
Full circle there. Okay, any additional questions? I see member Sund has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is for Director Fernandez, related to a comment on the inmate in custody program. So not directly related to anything here in the budget, but you said something that piqued my interest, and there are numbers involved. So I'll ask the question, what is the equivalent hourly rate as compared to a hired employee for that program?
Yeah, I'll let I think Mark Bechtel, who's our operations manager, is on the call. I'll let him handle that one.
Good evening, Budget Committee members. Mark Bechtel. I don't have the exact number because the number increases each year. But I will tell you that it may be quickly becoming a moot point because we have very little access to the inmate labor or adults in custody crews anymore. My recollection was they were running about, $100,000 to $200,000 a year. And that's 10 adults in custody per crew. They work sometimes 4 times, sometimes 5 days a week, and usually year round. Some of the crews were seasonal. We only had them for several months. At the height of the program, we were running 4 of those crews of the state correctional crews in parks and 1 or 2 crews in the utility, mainly in stormwater. But with the closure of the Mill Creek Correctional Facility, we have lost access to at least half of those crews. And then the other half are still encumbered with COVID pandemic restrictions. The only inmate crews or AIC crews that we have available to us now is, I believe, 1 state correctional crew for stormwater and a Marion County correctional crew through the county sheriffs. Again, I can come back to you with more specific numbers on the cost of the crews.
Yeah, Mark, it actually, a note has popped up here in my feed. It's 10 adults in custody for $700 a day.
Excellent. Okay.
So it's been the city, and that's required by law that inmates all have to work. So when that law passed years ago, Department of Corrections went looking for work, and this is long before Parks was in Public Works, and we benefited and have benefited tremendously over the years by being able to get 10 individuals, working all day, for what is now $700. It used to be cheaper, but we have these issues, as Mark has pointed out. So this whole thing may be a moot point, and at some point, not this year, we may need to request additional staffing, especially in parks, where that's where the most benefit has been.
Thank you.
Okay, taking the relative temperature of the group this evening, hitting the 8:30 mark. Any other questions for Director Fernandez or any other city staff on safe and reliable infrastructure and efficient, excuse me? Okay. Well, I will move us on to the final item tonight under special orders of business, and that's an opportunity for the committee to continue any earlier discussion or introduce an issue or concern for the committee's consideration. This will be our last topic before adjournment. Member Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a question for staff I'm hoping that they can bring back the answer to for our next meeting. And it sort of relates back to, it very much relates back to what Dr. Brown mentioned earlier. And I would be interested to know what the approximate cost would be if we were to simulcast our city council meetings and other meetings in additional languages such as Spanish, similar to what the school district does. It broadcasts at the same time in other languages, so more members of the community can tune in. And I would be interested to know what that cost would be for that program, so we could consider an expenditure in the budget.
I see a lot of head nodding, city staff. Mr. Eggleston.
Yeah, we can figure that information out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other closing thoughts or comments before we move towards adjournment this evening? A lot on the plate this evening for discussion. Remember that our next meeting will cover, a week from tonight, we'll cover good governance and safe community and have our public hearing on state shared revenue funds. So that's what we're looking at for next week. And then we'll have one more additional meeting to consider and approve the budget or recommend approval to the city council. Member Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question. So for the committee discussion, will we be able to pick that up again here next week, or do we have to put a pin into something now so we can talk about it next week?
That's a great question. Though we often reach this point in the meeting a little bit tired because we've been going at it for a couple hours, we always have this point at the end of our meetings for open conversation among the committee members. And we can talk about future things, we can talk about past things, and really the table is most open in the last meeting after we've heard the full presentation of all the areas from the city staff. That's when the conversation seems to be the most fruitful. Mr. Eggleston, do you want to add into that?
I would. The last meeting is, of course, open for your deliberations, but if there's any staff work that you need to have done, any information you'd like requested, we'd prefer to know about it ahead of time. If you'd like to discuss it at next week's meeting, it'd be great to hear about it tonight or an email in between. And then also similarly for the last meeting, we won't have a chance to put together any type of staff report if you're requesting information during that meeting.
Oh, okay, just for clarity then. So I think I should say it now so I don't mess this up. So it is in response to what Member Hoy just said. So in regards to having this variety of languages, is there a way that we can also find how much it would cost for members in our deaf community when it comes to signing? Is that also a part of the plan? If not, how can we make that a part of the plan? And also, I want to go back to something that Member Bennett said earlier. It's in regards to, making room at the table for a variety of other voices to be here. And so I would love the opportunity if we could just collectively talk about, what does that look like, feel like, and sound like when we want to invite others to the table that may have been traditionally not seen, heard, nor heard. And so, just really unpack that. And I realize that that's a conversation that could be categorized as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for some, that could be an uncomfortable conversation. But me and the skin that I am in, the role that I play, I would value that opportunity from this committee of people. Just to unpack that, to peel back the layers, to really see how we can support, what Member Bennett is actually talking about when it's inviting people to the table. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Brown. Member Hoy, did you have something to add there?
I'm sorry, I was just going to answer Dr. Brown's question directly, and that's that there are no issues that are off the table. You don't have to bring things up now to talk about them at the end. We can talk about anything at the end because we haven't actually voted on anything yet. And so you have full opportunity to bring everything up, but before we actually do the vote at the end. So, yeah.
Thanks for the clarification. Leave it hang for 1 minute and get back to my script. Thank you for, okay, there we go. That's why we do it. Member Nordyke and Member Anderson after her.
First of all, thank you to the staff for all your efforts to diligently address all of our pop quiz questions, including mine. And I also really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the conversation and how we can increase equity and access to these proceedings, which are incredibly important. And I just want to remind folks that, this is our opportunity as a committee to discuss what we recommend the city do with its money. We have a giant pot of money, and deciding when and how to spend that. That's why we have a public citizen committee. So I really appreciate hearing from my fellow committee members who are not elected officials. I was once in your shoes, and I so appreciate you vocalizing your questions, your concerns, and your vision for how we can succeed as a city. And I just want to point out that please do not forget to take a look at the public testimony that we are receiving in writing. Because of COVID, we're not meeting in person. And so most folks are deciding to phone in their testimony instead of by Zoom. But I hope that you all have taken into consideration the overwhelming support that you are seeing in public testimony for a mobile response unit. And you're seeing it from a huge, diverse array of individuals. You're seeing it from business owners. You're seeing it from mental health practitioners, You're seeing it from people from every part of this community. And so I look forward to discussing how to make that recommendation to include that for the city council's consideration. And I look forward to having that conversation with all of you in the future. This is about recommending where the city prioritizes its funds. And I strongly recommend that you read carefully the testimony and the outcry from our community for this mobile response unit funding. And all I'm asking for is a recommendation, not down to the last penny. And so that's what I will look forward to discussing with you. And if any of the budget committee members who are not elected officials, you know, if you would like to have more conversation about it, I'd like to find a way to do that in a way that is consistent with our public meetings laws. I suspect all of it's going to have to happen on camera, though. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Nordyke. Member Anderson.
Hey, first of all, Member Nordyke just very eloquently said what I was going to say, probably more eloquent than I could have, in terms of the importance of reading that correspondence. And for people in the community to feel comfortable sending that correspondence, that it is read and very carefully considered. As Member Nordyke mentioned, a lot of the messages that we're receiving are in strong support for a mobile response unit, what Eugene calls CAHOOTS. I teach down in Eugene, and I know that a lot of the students there have done speeches on this and speak very, very highly about it. The other thing is just to put out that I agree with what I think Secretary Anderson was mentioning as far as the idea of spreading broadband throughout the city. I think that this really is an equity issue because a lot of people are financially disadvantaged. And as we know that businesses, education, as well as civic engagement, a lot of that is done over the internet. And so I really would urge the Director of Urban Renewal to seriously consider expanding that citywide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Member Anderson. Member Chirac.
Yeah, just a quick comment to follow up on Member Brown's comment about getting more people to the table to hear more voices. A number of years ago, this budget committee would take basically their meetings on the road. They would go around various places in the city and hold these budget committees, not just, you know, like in the council chambers where we would normally meet. And for example, one of those meetings would be held at South Salem High School. That's the one I would attend. The library there where the meeting was held was full of people, and the people were not the ones I see normally coming to the SCAN Neighborhood Association meetings, which covers that same area. These were just other interested neighbors. And so I don't know what the turnout was in the other locations where the meetings were held, but it does take, by taking the meeting to the people, it is a good way to to get more people to attend, participate, and hear more of what their concerns are. I don't know the reasons for why that process was changed. It could have been funding, but I just thought that was a very effective process that we used to use in the old days.
Thank you. Member Bennett, you're on mute.
I just wanted to second that, Roz. I participated in all of those that went out that way back in the day, and several were very well attended, several were very poorly attended, but it went on for several years and actually worked fairly well going out into the community. It might be something the committee or the city may want to take a look at when we get beyond the COVID situation. Also, I wanted to just mention I'm testifying Saturday in front of the subcommittee of the Ways and Means Committee on a number of the issues we've talked about, the Navigation Center, the Sobering Center, as well as a mobile response unit looking for ARPA funds from the state level. We're going to go in and see what we can bounce out of there. So we're busily looking other places for funding as well for those programs. I know there are ones that individual council members or the council as a whole, and clearly some members of the community have very strong feelings about. So we're working on those at that level.
Thank you, Member Bennett. I guess I would suggest with the ARPA funds, they're going to continue to come up in our conversation. And I said in our last meeting, I think it's really important, the historic nature of these funds is something we can't deny. And the opportunity may not be over, even if we don't know everything we need to know about them before this budget cycle is over, whether it's a motion that comes out of this organization or a recommendation to the city council. When we were going to run out of money in our general fund, we recommended that the city council put together a citizen committee with the city council to come up with, the revenue sources. And I think that that's something, well, now we have the exact opposite problem. We've got more money on a timeline that we don't know how to spend it. And I think that we owe it to our citizens the same way we went and asked them, how do you want to be taxed in order to make the city whole? I think we should ask them, we should form a similar committee and say, how do you want us to spend this on your behalf and come out of the coronavirus pandemic better than when we went into it? And I'm not ready to, I don't have a motion formed, but I think it's something we should talk about more as a committee. Member Bennett.
One thought on those ARPA funds that I'll just share with you. I think it's important, and I know the manager will talk to us about it as well, is these are one-time dollars. You get to use them once, and if you use them once and set up a $1 million a year program, you're really not using them the way that was expected. So I think that'll be the challenge for us as we talk about, may well be a committee like you're talking about. I know the council is going to be working on this as part of its own charge. It's part of what our responsibility is, dealing with these funds as they become available. But it's that, I think the most difficult part of this, because I've seen this happen before over the years, you'll get a one-time gift, kind of however it comes at you. This one's huge. But trying not to invest that in things that obligate you so far into the future that you're going to suddenly start cutting other programs you have. It's finding that kind of balance. I hope people think about that before we go into a discussion.
Thank you. Member Nordyke, she's half in, she's half out. Do you have one more thing?
Yeah, I think that one of the cool things that we can consider doing with the ARPA funding is the sorts of infrastructure or sorts of things we would spend general fund money on, we can use spending ARPA fund money on and instead use that to pick up programs. So, I think we can think creatively about how to get this done. And I also want to give a shout out. We know from the city's past materials that we're not the only group getting money. The city is getting 32.8 million. Marion County is getting well over 65 million. Imagine how much we can do with 65 million in Marion County to address all of the things that we have been talking about in other ways. So, and the state, of course, will get a cajillion dollars. That's a technical term. But I know that the state is going to have public hearings to get input from the community on what to do with the money that they are receiving at the federal level. And I would encourage all of us to be good citizens and make your voice heard. The city government, the county government, the state government are all getting ARPA funds. The city, per usual, we get a tiny amount because we're the smallest of the three by a mile. But don't forget that we need to encourage all of our elected officials to use these funds to build a better city, county, and state. This is where I wave an American flag. So there you go.
Thank you, Member Nordyke. Okay, we knew tonight was going to be one of the longest of the 4 meeting session. We're pushing 9 o'clock. We've got some good ideas to ruminate on until next week and the following. Seeing nothing from the floor. Is there any other business for the Budget Committee this evening? Seeing none, I'm going to call us to adjournment. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.